Hey guys, welcome back. So this is just going to be a really quick video. I believe that the first thing that we have posted today is going to be our podium opinions for Yao Guang as well as Sparksy, on top of all the rerun variants that we're going to be facing for version 4.0. For this particular video, I just want to touch on for this thing right here, which is going to be our 1 out of 7 free limited 5-star character between Jingyuan, Kafka, E2 Dale, okay, I guess E0 Dale, Jingliu, Sparkle, Acheron, as well as Aventurine, and what should your options be when you're picking on which one of these 5 stars, right? So this is going to be coming from the perspective of someone that both owns these units at E0, as well as some of those players that if you want to get the vertical investment with the Eidolons, we're going to split into 2 separate videos, similar to how I did it for my R9 Energy video, that I did it for our Selector as well. So without further ado, let's just jump in, and the very first unit I will say is pretty much going to have, for most players, the highest value, and that is going to be Sparkle right here, right? I think it is very obvious that they really wanted to push Sparkle as the bridge, right, as the connector between version 3 onto version 4, a little bit similar to like how Sunday was acting as the bridge between version 3 to version, or rather version 2 to version 3, except that this time she's gonna be not just getting a rework, getting a massive buff. On top of that, we are getting her completely for free, which is gonna be seen from this later, right? Out of every single one of these units here, Sparkle, for I would dare say 90% of the population, especially for the casual community, if you do not want to play DOT and if you do not own Sparkle, she's pretty much gonna be the best pick. In fact, even if you play DOT, you probably would have already picked up Kafka. And for players that do not have Sparkle on your account, this value is pretty much gonna be unprecedented. It is almost like if they were to rework, like for example, like Kafka for back in those days, right? And they just gave everybody that want to play DOT, okay, you know what? Here's a free Kafka, so they can get the entire so they can get the entire DOT team going. Except that this time for Sparkle, it is very obvious after the buff, her utility is not just gonna be tied to your skill point DPS, and there is going to be very obvious Archer, your E2 as well as your QQ, and even when we saw from the live stream, Sparksy herself. In fact, Sparksy actually acts extremely similarly to QQ. You kind of think of her as like the Elation 5-star QQ, where you can spend more skill points, get your punchlines, and get more stacks for AHA. So the overall synergy for version 4.0, assuming that you picked up this free Sparkle at E0 S0, you can only just run it. Even till this day, on my main account, I have not picked up Sparkle Synergy Lycone. In fact, Sparkle's S1 is probably one of the only S1s in my entire account that I intentionally did not pick up, aside from, I think, Heisland's S1, because I'm just not too interested with DOT. Until this day, I have never regretted this decision. I think DDD on S5 is super nice. If you do want to get another alternative, if you don't really care about action value, Sunday's S1 is actually a pretty decent alternative, right? So if you do have yourself an additional copy of Sunday S1, yeah, this one, right? So if you do have yourself a Sunday S1, because of this additional 6 energy on top of the damage dealt, and even more skill point generation, you can consider running with Sparkle if your Sparkle is going to be having an exceptionally high speed. So this, ideally, you're hitting around 160-ish with equal 4-piece, or if you're going to be hitting the normal Sekiro's 4-piece, you could try to go for 170 plus, right? So without the Signature Lycone, which, you know, we probably definitely do not need the S1 for the Sparkle, this value on the overall buffs, I'll talk about it in the actual early access. She will basically give you this additional, this thing right here, right, this skill. It will no longer just be 1 turn until the start of the unit's next turn. So it will actually last 2 full turns. On top of that, it will recover 6 skill points instead of 4 skill points. And on top of that, any excess skill points can actually be stored. So there won't be a very awkward scenario where like you will cast Sparkle's ultimate in an awkward scenario and you can't really get enough energy, or you want to save up for your Ego 4-piece. You can literally just cast it as soon as possible so that you will get the full value out of this ultimate on top of the buffs, pretty much having 100% uptime after the buff, right? So with that order being established, I think that it is a very clear-cut choice. Sparkle is going to be your pick. And yes, if Sparkle is going to be the pick for this current scenario in Elation, right, how synergistically she's going to be working with Sparksy and the skill point DPS, unfortunately, Sunday is going to be in a very weird position, right? Because previously, I think it's kind of funny that after so long, Sunday having like pretty much mocked EZO Sparkle at every cell of the world, and nobody really uses like a Sparkle for a long time. And then Archer came in, and the Sparkle kind of saw a little bit of relevancy with Archer. And now because of this rework, I don't really know where we are actually going to be placing Sunday. Maybe for final teams, maybe for Jingyuan, if we're still going to be, maybe Aglea. These are the 3 main names you can still see Sunday in. Other than that, for the skill point DPS, namely your Archer, your Dale, your QQ, as well as Sparksy, Sparkle will definitely be having a very, very strong presence. In fact, any hyper carry roles with Sparkle, you could actually consider running both of these at the same time to do some sort of like a double hyper carry support setup, but I'm not too sure how the synergy is going to be working out. So right now, TLDR, Ezo Sparkle, very, very strong pick. Now, the next unit that I kind of want to be showing you guys over here, this is honestly a little bit of a niche case, and that is going to be Kafka, right? So the answer for this Kafka pick is very straightforward as well. If you're somebody that wants to play DOT, you need Kafka. Plain and simple, right? If you have been playing DOT since version 1, any of the DOT mains can just straight up tell you, especially after the rework, Kafka is a glue. She is literally the glue of any DOT team. You need Kafka to proc the DOT declination so that you can essentially stack on all of your DOT damage, front load them, and have a way faster rotation. Right now, you can just run out with the 4-piece Ego with Lukshaga, Tutorial Lycone. Right now, it's going to be this so that you can have a much higher ultimate proc time. Kafka itself doesn't really need to deal any damage, and you'll be seeing a lot more multipliers, especially after Black Swan's buff. Now, if you do not want to play DOT, don't pick her. Right, it is just really just that simple. There really isn't a choice, or rather an option for you guys to force yourselves playing a comp that you don't want to play just because she's given for free. If you do want to try picking up DOT, so for example, if for any reason you skipped Kafka last time and you somehow got yourself a Eidolons, alright, then maybe you want to use this selector for the free Kafka, pull for the rerun Black Swan, and then you will form yourself a very nice little DOT team which you can experiment on your own, right? Other than that, I don't think it's going to be too big of an option. I'm not going to be talking about any of the Eidolons. I'll just be saving them for the Eidolon portion. But at the baseline, E0 Kafka, if you want to play DOT, pick her. If you don't want to play DOT, just skip. Super easy. Now for the next unit, and that is going to be essentially the only other unit that if you really don't want either Sparkle or Kafka, that is going to be Acheron, right? I think Acheron so far, it's kind of crazy that, you know what I mean? Finally settling this, right? It is time to settle this. When I compare Acheron and Facial, well, guess who became a free unit? Okay, this is just slander, right? This is just joking, but in any case, yep, Acheron is actually gonna be a free unit despite being the emulator of self-destruction, which is kind of crazy. In any case, I would say that at E0, there really isn't too much of a point in pulling for Acheron because it's very speculative, right? Acheron's value and her strength, it basically ties around the other Nihility units. So in version 3, she got a okay-ish upgrade with Cypher, right? So if you want to introduce Cypher to Acheron, especially, or if you want to go for the rework Silverwolf with E1 Trippy, you can actually get a very nice performance with Acheron, right? It's gonna be good enough to clear off the endgame content, it's fine. But that is where her ceiling is gonna essentially be until we get a better version for Nihility units to pair with Acheron again. So whether or not we're gonna be getting a new Nihility units, that is completely speculation, right? And if you don't really want to use this selector for now, you can still save this up until I believe in version 4.2 because it lasts for 3 versions, and then see where that is going to be going, where they release new Nihilities and all sorts of stuff. If they are not going to be releasing new Nihilities and it is just going to be a focus on Elation Flagship or any other different team comps, then Acheron's power level is just going to be stuck with around Cypher and Silverwolf, which is just going to fall behind quite a bit compared to all of the other DPS because she really wants the Nihility units to be her core, right? And then on top of that, even if you were to run her with like the new Nihilities in version 4, the baseline multipliers is just getting a little bit hard to catch up. I think we all know by now, Acheron having the ability to cast ultimate once every turn or every other turn, it is very nice back in version 2. But nowadays, with the damage scaling, right, how the mechanics is going to be functioning, the AHA mechanics, the AHA instance, it is way more difficult to try to scale on your base multipliers compared to all the other units, especially when you have elation skills staying on like 4 different elation skills at the same time with one AHA instance, or like your Remembrance Flagship dealing like 2 million damage from a single dragon. It is just very difficult because the baseline multiplier is just not going to be that high. So I can't even believe I'm saying this. If Acheron is going to be getting a buff in the future, then maybe our value will go up by a lot. Considering the fact that she literally is going to be an emulator, so that's going to be there, right? I would say for HSR, whether or not you're an emulator, it doesn't really matter because look what happened to Dirta. right? So I would say Acheron at E0 is probably not going to be a wise play, especially if you don't even have Sparkle. I will highly recommend most players to just get Sparkle. If you want to have an easier time going to version 4, Elation is definitely going to be a very straightforward answer, especially with the free Sparkle.
So we know the dice, see where they may fall.
Now, for all of the other units behind, there isn't really too big of a gap. There is this very interesting sentiment regarding Aventurine, right? And this is the only other unit that I'll be talking about because the other three, Jingyuan, Jingliu, as well as Dale, I don't think we need to say too much unless they get a massive buff, then that's going to be that. But one last unit I can kind of talk a little bit more is going to be Aventurine. So, an argument that you could make for Aventurine is if you skipped every single limited sustain and you have no intentions for pulling in version 4 sustains, right? Your elation sustains. So the only real sustain you have after playing this game for almost 3 years is DHPD, which is free. Maybe you have a version 1 sustain like Luocha or Fuchen or Huo, right? For this particular scenario, Aventurine is actually not too bad of a pick because at the end of the day, you need 3 different teams for endgame, which is going to be Anomaly Arbitration. You could skip Anomaly Arbitration if you want, and you only run 2 sustains, and then you can pick up a version 4 sustain in the future, but purely just based on team building, Aventurine's slot is going to be slightly better because there are less competitors, right? Because HSR, they basically just release 2 different sustains and call it a day. So if you are lacking a sustain, especially for a third team, or if the current team count you are running is just not really strong enough, right? If you skip the Remembrance Flagship, you skip Gallagher, you skip everyone, you don't want to build anything, Aventurine can be considered to just make it a little bit more countable. But I would say this is probably only applicable to 0.00001% of the player base where you just have no sustains. And it's super bad, right? So for this setup, probably you can consider Aventurine, but I would say even with this setup, I would still consider getting a Sparkle if you do not have Sparkle. That is just how important Sparkle, I believe, is going to be for the Elation meta that's going to be going forward in version 4, right? Because the way that they already marketed how strong she's going to be tied to skill point distribution, at least for these earlier portions, I don't believe they buff a unit just for them to become irrelevant, especially for a support. For a DPS, you can see Jingliu and Blade is a little bit sus. But for units like a Kafka buff, even a Silver Wolf buff, these kind of utility buffs, their usage can actually stack on a much more considerable amount of time compared to a DPS buff. So I would say for Sparkle specifically, just for this showcase, at least with Yaguang and Sparksy, this value is still going to be really high up there. So I would highly recommend almost everybody to just pick up a Sparkle if you do not have a Sparkle, right? So that is pretty much going to be that for all of our units at a baseline E0, right? So Sparkle, number 1, it is super high gap, followed by Kafka. If you really want to play DOT, Kafka is almost not negotiable, so you kind of just get DOT. If you don't want to play Kafka, there's really no one else coming close to Sparkle's value, followed by Acheron. But Acheron is really sus, except if you want to get E to Acheron, which I'm going to be talking about very soon. Then followed by Aventurine for a super niche population. Then Jingyuan, Jingliu as well as Dale. You don't really have to think about it that much, right? Okay, at this point, we can just kind of talk a little bit more about our Eidolons, right? What kind of Eidolons should you guys be getting? I have no idea. Okay, I mean, I know, but we can't really talk about the Eidolons before the actual rework is going to be finalized. I would just say for Sparkle, I don't think Eidolon is going to be worth it, right? This is going to be a pretty nice defense ignore. This, whatever this change is going to be, from right now, if you have a E0 Sparkle, E1 Sparkle, it is the closest thing you can get to a direct upgrade because none of the other units really give you that much value. You get what I'm saying? So if you know you are going to be running Sparkle, you know you're going to be using Sparkle for your Elation team, for your skill point DPS, for your Q, for whatever it's going to be, then that E1 Sparkle will just inherently have more value for your account because you will use that unit more. Because HSR is a game where diversity is really just not important. You really want to have a as good of a vertical investment as possible, especially on your supports, if you want to try to run them against different DPSs across the current version. And I think Sparkle's E1, no matter what that's going to be, there just really isn't a lot of other DPS or other units from the Selector that can come close to the value you're going to be getting from Sparkle, right? Inclusive of Eidolon. So I would say that Sparkle's E1, if you have nothing else to use, you can just go ahead and get it. For your Kafka's Eidolon, for DOT means, right? Again, I just want to stress, this is only if you want to play DOT. Kafka's E1 is absolutely massive for DOT. In fact, I would say Kafka's E1 is way more impactful than Sparkle's E1 if you are a DOT main. If you don't play DOT, forget about it. If you do play DOT, for example, you have an E0 Kafka, right? And now you have this selector that can give you this E1 Kafka. I would highly recommend you take that, right? Only for DOT mains. Pick up the E1 Kafka, super nice. The follow-up attack with the, so not the follow-up, but the 100% DOT damage taken debuff, super nice increase. So that's gonna be that for Kafka E1. And then for Acheron, this is essentially gonna be our case over here. For Acheron, this is only if you have a E1 Acheron. That is the one of rare exceptions. If you only have a E1 Acheron, getting the E2 will make team building a lot more flexible, especially when compared to an E0 Acheron. So for whatever nihility supports is gonna come out, you could just run this E2 Acheron with the brand new version 4 and just tag them on with, for example, a Sparkle. Because you can technically still work that way. That has usually been the E2 Acheron team back then, where they just run a Sparkle, a nihility support, and a sustain. So if this line of thinking holds up, you could just consider getting the E2 Acheron only for the E1 Acheron owners. If you have an E3 or already have an E2, then it doesn't really matter too much. For some reason, if you have an E5, then you might as well just get an E6, so it is what it is. Other than that, I would not be recommending the Acheron items to anyone else, only for the E1 Acherons. For Aventurine's Eidolons, I would say that this is actually not too bad. It is like a mix between sustainability as well as crit damage. But frankly speaking, the values just don't really change too much. You get a little bit more shield and a 20% crit damage buff. In a vacuum scenario against endgame content, if your shield with Aventurine is lagging, you are probably going to be ending up on skill point negative scenarios. You have to spend more skill, right? And whether or not you have this E1, it is actually not going to be changing by that much, because the shield amount is just not that high for Aventurine. The skill is just not as high. The 20% crit damage is okay, but it is just like a little bit more damage, which translates to like less than a 10% final damage increase, right? So for this particular scenario, if you already use Aventurine for, let's just say, like, Phase Out, but then again, there's DHPD. And DHPD kind of just do everything that Aventurine can do, but better. So there really is like a very rare situation where I will consider an E1 Aventurine. E2 is good though, because E2 actually gives you all-type rare spend, which is going to be a pretty universal debuff, and this actually counts as a debuff for Acheron. You could get an E2 Aventurine just for Acheron, for him his basic attacks to stack on debuffs, right? This is the only one which I think is not too shabby, only for the Acheron owners, right? For the other Eidolons, I don't think they are going to be too crazy. If you do want to consider getting like one of the 3 different DPS, that's going to be your Dale, Jingyuan, Jingliu. Out of all these 3 bumps, the only one that really pops off super smart, and I still stand by this till this day, it is going to be the strongest E2 that was ever released back in version 2, or rather version 1. 100% action value advance with the E2. So if one fine day, right, if E2 Dale ever gets buffed one day, because they have been buffing a lot of units, right, if they ever get buffed one day, you could consider strictly just for yourself the E2 Dale, because this E2 is super diabolical, but if the effect change, it is what it is. The kit itself, I would say that it functions. I actually wouldn't really put it past them to buff E2 Dale, considering the fact that skill point DPS seems to be a thing with Archer. And if they just buffed Sparkle, what's stopping them from buffing another skill point DPS like Dale, right? So something to consider, just speculations, it is what it is. Jingliu and as well as Jingyuan, I really don't think that they have any hope unless they buff them again, so that is gonna be that. With that, I've pretty much come into the end of the best choice for your 5-star selector in Honkai Star Rail. To kind of summarize, you can just check out our tweet over here from PokeCorp. Sparkle, Definitive, Kafka, etc. Then Eidolons is going to be seen as below. TLDR for everything, want to save your time. Most players who do not have Sparkle should choose Sparkle. If you already have Sparkle, consider your different teams, which one you want Eidolons a little bit more, and if you're still going to be using them. If you are not using any of these 6 other units, then just get E1 Sparkle, right? Because she is going to be a pretty safe pick. Whether or not you are going to be using her, Elation will definitely still have a place considering her buff that we just saw in the patch, right? So let me know what guys in the thoughts and comments below. Word of the day is going to be Sparkle. I'm so overworked, bro, and my choice date. So join Twitch, join Discord, use code POKE for 10% gamers ups. All the best for Gacha Boost. See you guys next time. Oh my god, bro. Holy overworking. Bye bye.
Play with me if you don't want to cry or dance with me.